Hey everyone, welcome back to Creepy Mysteries. First off, a huge thank you to all of you for the amazing support you've shown so far. Your comments and likes mean a lot to me and keep this channel going. If you're new here, I'd love for you to stick around and join our mysterious journey. Don't forget to leave a comment and share your thoughts. It helps the channel grow and keeps the spooky stories coming. Now let's dive into today's stories. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. My girlfriend Rachel and I had been looking forward to a quiet stay at a small but highly rated hotel just outside the city. The moment we stepped into the lobby, though, something felt off. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely glanced up when I gave my name. She typed something into her computer, then paused, her brow furrowed. "Mr. Harris?" she asked, glancing between me and the screen. "Yeah, that's me. We have a reservation under Daniel Harris." She hesitated, then pursed her lips. "That's strange. It says you already checked in." Rachel and I exchanged confused looks. "That's impossible," I said. "We just got here." The woman double-checked the screen. "It says Daniel and Rachel Harris checked in about 2 hours ago. Room 96. For a second, I thought maybe there had been some kind of mix-up, maybe another couple with the same last name. But then she turned the screen toward me, showing the check-in form with my name and my exact signature. My stomach tightened. "I didn't sign that." The receptionist sighed, clearly annoyed. "Well, someone did. But don't worry, we'll sort it out. I'll give you a different room." She handed us the key card to room 98, just down the hall from our original room. I was too tired to argue further, so we took the key and headed upstairs. The hotel had an eerie silence to it, the kind where every little noise, our footsteps, the hum of a vending machine, the distant murmur of a television, seemed amplified. As we reached the hallway, I couldn't stop glancing at room 96. Someone was in there pretending to be us. We settled into our room, trying to shake the weirdness of it. Rachel joked that maybe our duplicates had gotten us a free upgrade, but neither of us was really laughing. The whole situation felt wrong. That night, things got worse. I woke up sometime after 2 a.m., feeling strange. Not scared exactly, but uneasy, like something was watching me. The room was pitch black except for the faint glow of the digital clock. Then the bathroom light flickered on. My breath caught in my throat. I turned to Rachel, but she was still asleep. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with something unnatural. I forced myself to get up and check the bathroom. The light buzzed overhead, flickering sporadically. I reached for the switch, but the second my fingers touched it, the light turned off by itself. I stood there in the pitch dark, my heart pounding. Then in the silence, I heard something behind me, a whisper. It was coming from the bathroom mirror. I didn't stick around. I slammed the door shut and climbed back into bed, pulling the covers over myself like a child. I didn't sleep. At around 3 a.m., I heard something else. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on our door. I held my breath, frozen. Another 3 knocks. Rachel stirred. "What was that?" she mumbled, half asleep. I whispered, "Someone's at the door." She sat up, confused. The knocking continued. I grabbed my phone, turned on the screen, and saw something that made my stomach drop. A notification from the hotel's Wi-Fi. "Welcome back, Daniel Harris. You are now connected." My blood ran cold. Whoever was outside that door was me. Rachel grabbed my arm. "Daniel, don't open it." I wouldn't have, even if she hadn't said it. The knock stopped. Then a sound came from the hallway, a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It scraped slowly past our room, moving toward room 96. Rachel was trembling. I felt like I was going to be sick. We stayed like that for hours, too afraid to move, too afraid to even breathe. Eventually, the sun started to rise and the feeling of dread in the room began to fade. The next morning, things got even stranger. When I went to grab my suitcase, it was open, and not just unzipped, it was neatly unpacked. My clothes were hung in the closet, my toothbrush and deodorant placed by the sink, my phone charger plugged into the outlet next to the bed. I turned to Rachel. "Did you do this?" She gave me a weird look. Number I thought you did. A cold dread crept up my spine. Someone had been in our room. We stormed down to the front desk, demanding an explanation. The receptionist looked even more confused than we were. "There's no way anyone entered your room," she said. "Only you two have the key card." I insisted she check the security cameras. She hesitated. "Sir, I'm not asking," I snapped. After a long pause, she sighed and led us into a back office. She pulled up the footage from outside our room. For the first few hours of the night, nothing. Just an empty hallway. Then at around 3:15 a.m., the screen flickered. Just for a second. And when it came back, there was someone standing in front of our door. Not a person, a shadow. No distinct features, no clothes, no face. Just a dark figure, motionless. It stood there for nearly an hour. No movement, no knocking, just standing. Then at exactly 4:06 a.m., the screen flickered again, and the shadow was gone. No sign of it entering or leaving. We left the hotel immediately, didn't even check out, just grabbed our things and drove. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I called the hotel asking about room 96. The woman on the phone hesitated before saying, "Sir, we don't have a room 96. I hung up. I still don't know what happened that night. Who or what signed my name, or who unpacked my suitcase. But I do know one thing. Someone else was in that hotel with us, and they knew our names." I used to work the night shift at a mid-sized hotel just outside of town. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it was easy money. Most nights were slow, checking in the occasional guest, answering phone calls, making sure the lobby was quiet. But one night, something happened that I still can't explain. It was around 2 a.m., and I was killing time at the front desk when I noticed a key card sitting by the lost and found box. It was old, really old. The hotel had switched to digital key cards about 10 years ago, but this one was the thick, plastic kind we used before then. It had a faded room number printed on it. 986. That was odd. Our hotel only had 12 floors. There was no room 986. I assumed it was some old souvenir someone had left behind, but something about it unsettled me. I should have just thrown it away. Instead, I got curious. I took the key and walked to the elevators. The button for the 9th floor existed, but there was no 986. Still, as a joke, I swiped the old key card over the panel. The elevator doors immediately shut. I hadn't pressed anything. I watched in growing discomfort as the numbers above the doors blinked. 2, 3, 4, climbing higher and higher. Then it passed the 12th floor. The elevator should have stopped. Instead, the numbers kept going. 13, 14, 15. With a soft chime, the doors slid open. I was standing in a hallway that shouldn't exist. The wallpaper was different, an ugly peeling yellow, nothing like the rest of the hotel. The hallway stretched long and narrow, with a single flickering light at the far end. The air was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something rotten. And then I saw it. At the end of the hall, room 986. The door was slightly open, just a crack. I don't know what possessed me to step forward, but I did. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back, to get in the elevator and leave. But I couldn't. I had to see inside. The moment I got within a few feet of the door, a sound stopped me dead in my tracks. Whispering. Low, urgent voices. Overlapping, coming from inside the room. Dozens of them. But they weren't speaking a language I recognized. It was more like gibberish, a mix of sounds that made no sense but still sent ice through my veins. Then the whispers stopped. Silence. I reached out, heart pounding, and gently pushed the door open. The room was completely empty. No furniture, no lights. Just a dark, hollow space. The window on the far side showed nothing but blackness. No streetlights, no city skyline, nothing. Like the hotel didn't even exist outside these walls. I stepped inside. The second my foot crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, grabbing for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, rising all around me. But this time, they weren't coming from inside the room. They were coming from the walls. The wallpaper bulged in places, like something was pressing against it from the other side. The shapes of hands stretching the thin material, pushing through. Then faces, distorted impressions of mouths and eyes, writhing beneath the surface like trapped bodies trying to escape. I pounded on the door, screaming, yanking at the handle, but it was like it had fused to the wall. The whispers grew into frantic, manic murmurs. The figures behind the wallpaper started clawing. Nails scraped against the paper. The bulging faces twisted into grins. Then a voice, one voice, cut through the chaos. "Let us in." I didn't think. I just turned and ran. The moment I did, the door flew open. I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for air. The whispers vanished. The hands and faces melted back into the walls. The air was still, heavy. I sprinted to the elevator, slammed the button, and when the doors finally opened, I nearly collapsed inside. I hit the lobby button over and over. As the doors started to close, I caught one last glimpse of the hallway. Room 986 was gone. The hall stretched into darkness, smooth, unbroken walls where the door had just been. I didn't stop running until I was in my car. I didn't clock out. I didn't even lock the front desk. I just left. The next day, I called my manager and quit. A week later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Just a small, unmarked box. Inside was a single hotel key, the same old key card, the one for room 986. I threw the key card in the trash, but that night, I woke up to find it sitting on my nightstand. No matter how many times I got rid of it, it always came back. I don't know what that room was or what it wanted, but I have a horrible feeling that one day, I'll wake up and find myself standing outside room 986 again. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway. Tom and Lisa, both in their late 20s, had been looking forward to a break from their hectic lives in the city. They decided to take a trip upstate to an old, charming hotel known for its rich history and serene surroundings. The place was said to have a vintage atmosphere, antique furniture, old-world decor, and a strange, almost eerie charm to it. The hotel was the kind of place that looked like it had been frozen in time. They arrived in the late afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the hotel's faded stone exterior. Inside, the air smelled like old books and dust, and the dim lighting only added to the building's mysterious atmosphere. The receptionist, a woman with pale skin and unblinking eyes, gave them a polite smile but said nothing as she handed them a key. "Room 176, she said in a soft, almost whispering voice. "Enjoy your stay." Tom and Lisa exchanged a glance, intrigued by the number. Room 176. It sounded oddly foreboding. When they entered the room, they were immediately struck by its antiquated charm. The wallpaper was a faded floral pattern, the bedspread an old, elegant design, but it was the large, ornate mirror above the bed that caught their attention. The mirror was beautiful, but it had a strange, cloudy tint to it. The reflection in it didn't seem to align perfectly with the room. It felt wrong. Tom dismissed the feeling, trying to put it out of his mind. That night, after unpacking and settling in, Lisa and Tom decided to get some rest. Lisa, exhausted from the drive, fell asleep almost immediately. Tom, however, couldn't sleep. His eyes kept darting to the mirror. Something about it unnerved him. It wasn't just the fogged-up glass or the odd reflection. It was the feeling that it wasn't showing them the room they were in. It felt like there was something else behind it, something watching. But he shook off the thought. It was just a mirror, right? Tom finally dozed off, but he woke up a few hours later. The room was still dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the streetlights outside. He turned over to check on Lisa, but she wasn't there. Confused, he sat up in bed. The room felt colder. He glanced around, his heart suddenly racing, his eyes locked onto the mirror. There, in the reflection, Lisa was standing by the bed. But it wasn't her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, unblinking, staring directly at him from the glass. But in the real room, there was no one. Tom's throat went dry, his pulse quickening. He reached out, desperately trying to wake Lisa, but she didn't move. He reached again, shaking her harder this time, but nothing changed. That's when the reflection started to move. Lisa's reflection in the mirror slowly twisted its head toward him, her eyes filled with a dark, hollow emptiness. Then the reflection started smiling. Not a normal smile, but something twisted, a grin that seemed far too wide, far too sinister. Tom recoiled in terror, his breath catching in his throat. He turned away from the mirror, closing his eyes tight. When he opened them again, Lisa was back in the bed, but she was different. Her face was blank, almost lifeless. "Lisa?" he asked, his voice shaking. She didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the mirror. "Lisa!" Tom repeated, shaking her harder. This time she blinked, but her eyes still looked distant, unfocused. She muttered, almost in a trance, "We need to leave this room. Now." Her voice sounded so hollow, so unlike her own. Tom didn't know what to do. He grabbed her by the arm and tried to pull her up, but as soon as he did, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The temperature in the room dropped dramatically and he could see his breath forming in the air. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside, but when he rushed to the door and opened it, there was no one there. Only silence. The air grew thick with a heavy, oppressive feeling, and Tom felt a cold hand brush against his neck. He spun around, heart hammering in his chest. The mirror reflected something new. A shadow was standing there, just behind him. It was the figure of an old woman, her face pale and twisted, with hollow eyes staring at him. Her mouth opened slowly and she whispered something Tom couldn't quite make out. The words were low, guttural, and menacing, like something ancient. Tom froze in terror as the woman in the mirror began to move toward him. The glass rippled, like the surface of a pool disturbed by a stone, and for a moment it looked like the woman was about to crawl out of the mirror itself. Tom grabbed Lisa, pulling her away from the bed as the shadows in the room seemed to stretch toward them. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Tom tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. He backed away, his eyes still locked on the mirror, where the old woman's reflection was growing larger and closer with each passing second. Her skeletal fingers reached out, stretching toward them, and just as her cold hand nearly touched his arm, a loud, shrill scream filled the room, coming from the mirror itself. Tom couldn't take it any longer. He screamed, running for the window. With all his strength, he shoved it open, feeling the cool night air rush in. He didn't look back. Somehow, they managed to escape, running out into the parking lot, hearts racing. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them. That old woman's face was burned into his mind. When they finally reached the front desk to check out, the same receptionist was there. She looked at them with that same distant expression. "Room 176, she said softly. "I hope you didn't get too attached." Tom and Lisa hurried out of the hotel, but Tom couldn't resist asking her one last thing. "What's the deal with that room? Why is it so strange?" The receptionist's smile faltered, and she glanced down at her desk for a moment. Then she looked up, her expression colder than ever. "Room 176 was where an old woman once died. Her name was Eleanor Harrow, and she was the last guest to stay there over 50 years ago. Some say her soul was trapped in the mirror. Others say she never left." Tom felt a chill run down his spine. "Is that true?" The receptionist nodded slowly. "Yes. Every guest who stays in that room, they don't always leave the same way. Some vanish completely. Others never speak again. Room 176 is cursed, and once you've stayed there, the mirror doesn't let go." Tom felt his blood run cold. He didn't need to hear more. As they stepped out into the night, he looked up at the hotel one last time. In the window of room 176, he could have sworn he saw someone standing there. It wasn't Lisa, and it wasn't him either. It was the old woman, her cold, dead eyes staring straight at him. Traveling for work had become second nature to Mark. As a sales representative, he spent most of his nights in different hotels, often alone, eating takeout in dimly lit rooms that never quite felt right. At this point, he wasn't picky. Just give him a quiet place to sleep and he was fine. But this hotel was different. From the moment he stepped into the lobby, something felt off. The place had a strange, old-world charm. Not run down exactly, but certainly past its prime. The air smelled faintly of dust and something else. Something he couldn't quite place. The wallpaper, once elegant, was now peeling in the corners, and the lighting was dimmer than it should have been. It was like stepping into a place forgotten by time. The receptionist, a gaunt man with dark circles under his eyes, barely acknowledged him as he slid the keycard across the counter. "Room 217, he muttered, barely looking up. Mark hesitated. There was something in the man's voice, something strange, like he wanted to say more, but chose not to. Shaking it off, Mark grabbed his key and headed to the elevator. The second-floor hallway was unsettling, dimly lit, with faded carpeting and an eerie stillness that made Mark feel like he was being watched. The doors all looked the same, their numbers bolted onto the wood in slightly different fonts, as if they had been replaced at different times. When he reached room 217, an uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. He swiped the keycard. The door clicked open, and the sensation intensified. The room was standard: a queen-sized bed, a desk, a small TV, and a single armchair near the window. But the air inside was thick, heavy. It felt like he had walked into a space that hadn't been used in a long time. A faint smell lingered, something between mildew and old wood, mixed with something else, something faintly metallic. And then there was the mirror. A large, old-fashioned mirror hung on the wall across from the bed. The frame was ornate, intricate, but the glass had an odd quality, cloudy, almost warped. Something about it made Mark's skin crawl. Trying to shake the feeling, he tossed his bag onto the bed and turned on the TV. The static-filled screen flickered for a moment before settling on some local news channel. Then, 3 loud knocks. Mark froze. The sound had come from inside the room. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the space. The closet door was slightly ajar. He could have sworn it was closed when he walked in. Heart pounding, he approached it cautiously and pulled it open. Nothing. Just an empty closet. Shaking his head, Mark shut the door firmly and locked it. He told himself it was just his imagination, travel exhaustion, the weird atmosphere of the hotel getting to him. But deep down, something told him this place wasn't normal. That night, as he lay in bed, the temperature in the room dropped. The air grew so cold that he could see his breath. And then, a whisper, software faint, almost imperceptible. Mark bolted upright, his pulse pounding. He grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the room. Nothing. The mirror, though, it looked different. The reflection seemed off. The bed was there, the desk, the TV. But there was something else. A dark shape, barely visible, standing in the corner. Mark spun around, but the corner was empty. When he turned back to the mirror, the shape was closer. He scrambled for the bedside lamp and flicked it on. The moment the light filled the room, the air felt normal again. The reflection was just a reflection. The shape was gone. Mark barely slept. The next morning, exhausted and unsettled, he decided to check out early. The same tired-looking receptionist was at the desk, typing something into an old computer. "I'd like to check out," Mark said, setting the keycard down. The man barely looked up. "What room?" 217. The receptionist's fingers froze over the keyboard. His brow furrowed. 217? He repeated, glancing up at Mark with something like confusion or fear. Mark felt a cold sensation creep up his spine. "Yeah," he said, suddenly uneasy. "Why?" The receptionist hesitated, then turned to a back shelf, pulling out an old leather-bound ledger. He flipped through the pages, his expression darkening. Finally, he looked up. "Sir, are you sure that was your room?" Mark's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" The receptionist turned the ledger around. Mark's eyes scanned the list of occupied rooms from the night before. Room 216, room 218. There was no room 217. His breath caught. "This has to be a mistake. I stayed there last night." The receptionist exhaled slowly, then leaned in. That room hasn't existed for years. Mark's blood ran cold. What? The receptionist glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. Years ago, a man checked into room 217. Business traveler like you. One night he disappeared. Just vanished. His belongings were still in the room. Wallet, suitcase, even his phone. But he was gone. The room was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. No way for him to have left. They searched the entire hotel. Never found him. Mark's skin prickled. The receptionist's voice dropped lower. After that, weird things started happening. Guests staying in that room reported hearing whispers, seeing things in the mirror. Some even said they felt someone in the bed with them. Mark swallowed hard. So the management sealed the room, changed the layout of the floor. There shouldn't be a room 217 anymore. Mark's heart pounded in his ears. He took a slow step back, his hands clammy. But I was there last night, he whispered. The key card worked. The receptionist stared at him for a long moment, then finally said, "Then I think you should leave. Now." Mark didn't argue. As he grabbed his bag and hurried outside, he felt a deep, unsettling unease crawl through his body. Something wasn't right. He reached his car and, before getting in, turned back toward the hotel. And that's when he saw it. Up on the second floor at the end of the hall, where room 217 shouldn't exist, was a window. And standing in it was a figure, a shadowy shape, barely visible, watching him. And just as Mark locked eyes with it, the shape moved. He didn't stick around to see what happened next. He got in his car, started the engine, and never looked back. Years later, Mark finally told his story in an interview with a paranormal investigation podcast. He hadn't spoken about that night in detail before, mostly because he didn't want to believe it himself. But the memory never left him. And that wraps up today's story. I really hope it resonated with you or gave you something to think about. Stories like these are what keep me passionate about creating, and your support makes it all worthwhile. If you've got any thoughts, opinions, or even your own experiences to share, don't hold back. Drop them in the comments. I'd love to start a conversation and hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, make sure you stick around. I've got plenty more coming that I think you'll love. Thanks so much for watching, for being here, and for supporting this journey. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.